Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. The senators and all in attendance will please stand and be led in an invocation by the Honorable Stephen D. Newman, 23rd Senatorial District. Following the invocation, all will remain standing and be led in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America by Michael Adams, Director of Human Resources, Senate Clerk's Office.
Let's pray. Good morning, Lord. We're pleased to come before you today and thank you for the opportunity to be in this place. Today we come to you with three asks. One, that you give us wisdom. Two, protection. And we want to give thanks. Lord, James 1:5 says that if anyone asks for wisdom, it will be given to them generously. And today I ask for wisdom for our Senate leadership, for Senators Lucas and Saslaw and Norman and Locke and others. I ask that you will give wisdom to our Lieutenant Governor as he leads us, for Susan and Tara and others as they take care of the functions of the Senate. Finally, I ask that you give wisdom to all of us as we attempt to lead Virginia. Lord, we also ask for your protection. We ask for your protection from this dangerous virus. We ask for your protection for the elderly, those in nursing homes, assisted living facilities that this has hit so hard. Lord, this is a big virus, and you are a bigger God. Lord, we also come to you today and give you thanks. Thank you for bringing Mark and Bryce and George back to us healthy. Thank you for loving us, and thank you for caring for us. So God, today we pause and ask for wisdom and protection and to give you thanks. We ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Clerk will call the roll. All those in attendance will please record their vote aye. Clerk will close the roll.
You have a quorum, Mr. President. Senate Journal for Thursday, September the 3rd, 2020.
Senator from Lynchburg, Senator Peake moves that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 33, noes 4.
Ayes 33, noes 4. The reading of the journal is waived. The clerk will report any communication from the House of Delegates.
We do not have any, sir. Oh, sorry. We do.
The senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I move that we waive the reading of the journal from the House of Delegates, and I hope everybody votes for this.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the reading of the communication from the House of Delegates be waived? All in favor of waiving the reading will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 3.
Ayes 34, noes 3. The reading of the communication from the House of Delegates is waived. The clerk will report any communication from the governor.
We do not have one, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Is there any other business to come before the Senate in the morning hour? Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two announcements, please, sir.
Senators, the floor.
First of all, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not signed on to the resolution for Lieutenant John Hager, it's on the corner of my desk, and I would appreciate it very much if everyone would get on that. I know some of you have signed on electronically, but I don't know how to work that. So if you have not done electronically, please do so physically. The second matter, Mr. President, is after we complete the morning hour, I need about 10 minutes for Senate Republican caucus to meet in the tent, but we're not folding our tent and going home.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is Senator from Alexandria, Senator Eben, rise?
For request.
Senator has the floor.
Could the Journal note that the senator from Fairfax City is absent due to pressing personal business?
Thank the senator. The Journal will so reflect. For what purpose is Senator from Russell, Senator Chafin, rise?
Could the Journal reflect that the senator from Washington County is away on personal pressing business?
Thank the senator. The Journal will so reflect. Do any other senators wish to be recognized? Is there any other business to come in the morning hour? Seeing none, without objection, the Senate will stand in recess for 10 minutes.
Big problem. Chap's not here. We don't have the votes. We need
Who?
20, Chap. We need 21 votes to pass
We do.
the Sickles bill.
Senate will come to order. Senators will please take their seats. The clerk will call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Friday, September the 4th, 2020. Regular calendar, House Bill on third reading. House Bill 5103, a bill relating to the General Appropriation Act, appropriation of funds for the Department of Elections. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations, and there are 2 floor amendments.
Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
I ask that that bill go by for the day, please.
Thank the senator. Without objection, House Bill 5103 will go by for the day.
Uncontested calendar, Senate bill on third reading. Senate Bill 5031, a bill relating to legal holidays Juneteenth.
Senator from Hampton, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 5031 pass, and speaking to that.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Bill 5031 recognizes the 19th day of June of each year, also known as Juneteenth, as a legal holiday in the Commonwealth to commemorate the announcement of the abolition of slavery in Texas, the last of the former Confederate States of America to abolish slavery, and to recognize the significant roles and many contributions of African Americans to the Commonwealth and the nation. Again, I move that Senate Bill 5031 pass.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be recognized regarding Senate Bill 5031? Seeing none, the question is, shall Senate Bill 5031 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, noes 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. Senate Bill 5031 passes.
Regular calendar, Senate bill on third reading. Senate Bill 5117, a bill relating to emergency services and disaster law, powers and duties of the governor, executive orders, penalty.
Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, I move that the bill pass.
Senator has the floor.
Presently, violation of an executive order is a Class 1 misdemeanor. This bill comes at the request of the governor and simply allows an executive order to be punished as a civil penalty by a fine of up to $500. It states that the money will go to the literary fund. It's a simple bill to give the more flexibility for enforcement of executive orders, and it actually reduces punishment, reduces penalties. Again, I ask that the bill pass.
Mr. President.
Thank the senator. Senator from Bedford, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for just a couple of questions?
Will Senator yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator yields. You have the floor.
Mr. President, reading over the bill, just a few questions. One, does the bill apply to any and all executive orders that are provided for under 44.146, which is the section that you're amending?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say to the gentleman that if he looks on line 35, it says that if it does apply to all executive orders where the executive order declares a violation to be punishable as a civil penalty. So if that language is in the executive order, it does apply to that. Any order.
Would the gentleman yield?
Further question? Senator yield?
Yes, I will.
Senator yields. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I'd ask the gentleman, because it's not stated in the bill nor in the code section, how many violations could one be charged with under this section? Because it goes to the automobile DMV section and that section in 46. I'm wondering, could an individual be charged multiple times for this and go through the same procedure as outlined in the bill?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say to the gentleman that there's no limitation on the number of charges within the body of this bill. And certainly a person could be charged for each violation they commit.
Further question?
Mr. President, I think I'd like to speak briefly to the bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I know that this bill is one that the administration has very much desired. I struggle immensely with this bill, and I'm going to give you some of the reasons why. First, I fundamentally don't believe that Virginians were meant to be governed and penalized by press conference, and that's literally what I'm concerned about is this bill. I think there's a bit of unmasking that needs to take place with the bill. First, I know it's not the intention, but it is the impact, as each of you know, that we have only been dealing with the Class 1 misdemeanor, and there have been very precious few that have been charged on a misdemeanor. There have been some, but it is normally for a grosser violation. And the question is why, and because Commonwealth's attorneys are very much involved in that process. There is a high bar in that section of the code. There is a knowing that you have violated it, and it has to go before in the criminal proceedings. Now, we are looking to dramatically lower the bar as introduced. Instead of having this replace the Class 1 misdemeanor, this is in addition to the Class 1 misdemeanor. Mr. President, in committee, I noticed that there was testimony that came to the committee that talked about the fact that if you want a lower penalty, then you vote for this bill. In my opinion, that argument is greatly misleading because right now there are very few violations, and once you pass this, there is the availability of extraordinary violations that will come about that do not go through this criminal process. As the gentleman from Bath indicated, there's not a limit on the number of violations. I was hoping that we would see that there will be a limitation that doesn't maybe include churches or synagogues or otherwise, Mr. President. That is not there. I know it's very difficult because of the law enforcement and the HIPAA. There's no indication of whether or not this could ever be used in regards to a vaccine or not. Mr. President, I remember back the last time that we had a mass fine that this legislature passed. Many of you opposed it, some have supported it, but it was on these super high highway fines. You remember those? They lasted for about 6 months, and then we were back down here after an uproar, reversing those, and we took those away. Mr. President, when you look at what this will cover, it does cover, as the gentleman from Bath indicated, all executive orders. Mr. President, as you'll remember, as you watch through the process, the governor has been diligently trying to do the right thing in many cases, but the executive orders oftentimes went into a lot of unusual directions. I'll never forget the surreal moment that I had when I was told, not by the governor, but by a staff member, on the laws, the rules, the laws as it relates to not skating, but dance skating. I never knew that there was rules and laws related to dance skating, but we were told in great detail what that is. Mr. President, right now in my office back in Lynchburg, I happen to be moving my office around in the Code of Virginia. For some reason I have it as opposed to the online, but it stacks up about this high. It's about 5 feet high. Mr. President, if you were to reach into that laws that have been done by representative democracy, pull out one piece of paper, tear that in half, tear it in half, tear it in half again, you would get down to one paragraph. One paragraph in that 5 feet that is allowing us to be ruled by press conference. Now, Mr. President, it's not this governor's fault. I think it's our fault. Many states have a mechanism whereby if you go in executive order, you don't live for months, for 6 months, for years under executive order. The legislature is called back, as you would expect, and they get the opportunity to vote on the executive orders and support or deny. That's representative democracy. Mr. President, so what we have here today is we have every order that comes through by the executive branch is now going to be able to be administered by a law enforcement officer with a $500 penalty without a limit on the number that would be required. Mr. President, I really have many questions about the bill that is coming forward, and I know that there are some who legitimately are very much concerned about where we are, and this virus is extremely dangerous. The problem, Mr. President, is that one, unless we put an emergency order on this bill, this is not going to become effective for a long, long time. And so I don't know if we will be post-vaccine or not, but what will remain in the Code of Virginia is an extraordinary power to be able to not only go through a Commonwealth attorney on a Class 1 misdemeanor, but also go through the process of very, very quickly potentially handing out these fines. Mr. President, I know that I may be a little unusual in this case in that I just am very, very concerned about our Republican, our Democrat process when we go through this, and we have kind of endured a legislative absence from the decision making. There'll be a lot of these questions that we'll actually ask as the budget comes through. We have given away about $3 billion that we have no oversight over. We just said it's going to be appropriated by another branch of government. We have allowed, by us not bringing ourselves back into session, for executive order after executive order, and if you go through them, they are on very, very minuscule items to be the way in which we're governed. So, Mr. President, I think that this is a tool that doesn't decrease the penalties as far as the net number. Sure, the depth of it may be decreased, but the width will be much greater. We're going to see many, many more, and I understand why the governor's office would want to push this. It allows him to further his executive orders. It allows him to not go through the Commonwealth Attorney on the first go. Instead, they can bring the charges and they will go through what is basically the DMV process. Mr. President, I don't think this enhances freedom. I think it is a step back from freedom, and I hope we will not pass the bill. Mr. President, thank you for your time.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Arlington, Senator Favola, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to ask the patron a question and then to speak to the bill. So I ask a question to the senator from Bath.
Senator Yields. Senator Yields, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my understanding from reading the bill that the types of offenses are not expanded under this bill. It's still just talking about the executive orders the governor has issued related to this pandemic.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say that the senator is exactly correct. And if she looks, if the body looks at the language on line 34, it's either a civil penalty or a Class 1 misdemeanor. So this does make the violations more enforceable, but it also reduces the penalty.
Further question?
No further questions, Mr. President. I'd like to speak to the measure.
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would encourage the body to support this bill. We are talking about an enforcement measure that is related to executive orders issued by our governor when we have a pandemic intended to protect the public health. When we have a public health emergency, we can only protect ourselves when every individual abides by some rules. And this doesn't expand the number of rules that are under the executive order. This merely makes it easier to enforce those rules for everybody's health. We're talking about issues related to quarantine or wearing a mask or the number of individuals in a large gathering. This executive order was issued so Virginians can stay safe. And so far, we've done fairly well when you compare our COVID-19 cases to the number of cases around the country. If the governor is asking for this tool, and I believe local governments are okay with it, nobody has contacted me saying that they were concerned. I haven't heard any constituent indicating concern with this bill. I think we need to stand up for Virginians and vote for this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Would the gentleman from Bedford yield for a question?
Good morning, Senator. Senator Yields, you have the floor.
I would ask the senator, I listened to his comments very closely. Does the senator believe that this measure expands the executive power of the governor by virtue of being able to have a violation be declared a civil penalty? Is that the senator's concern?
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, it doesn't actually expand the power, in my opinion. You end up with the power being stated earlier on lines 11 through 15. What it does do is it does take the enforcement and it takes it out of going directly to the Commonwealth Attorney and they decide whether they're going to bring charges, and allows a law enforcement officer, any of those, to see in a violation and it's not restricted in any way, whether it be at a church or another gathering or otherwise, and it isn't limited to the type of violation. The violations are all done by press conference, and then an executive order, and then we all go to Matt Manziel and ask him what it means, and then we get the answers. But those orders that are done in that manner will now have a secondary way that they may be enforced, and that is on line 34 with the $500 fine, in addition to the method which is the Class 1 misdemeanor, which there's been very, very few of thus far in Virginia.
Would the senator yield for another question, Mr. President?
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
I would direct the senator's attention to lines 33 and 34. And would he not agree that prior to this, the changes suggested by the patron, the crime would be a Class 1 misdemeanor that would not require the police officer to go to the Commonwealth's attorney, but to issue a warrant or go to a magistrate without any need to seek the consent of the chief law enforcement officer in the district, in the community?
Yeah.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, the gentleman is right, and I should revise my remarks. You can go to a magistrate as you can with any other of the misdemeanor crimes, yes.
Would the gentleman yield for a final question?
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Would the senator agree that perhaps the genesis of this legislation was to have some enforcement or teeth behind large groups of people that are, for example, gathering in a home, not social distancing, with not wearing masks, and perhaps spreading COVID-19? Does the senator agree with that premise?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, it's a good question, and I don't know. The governor's office did not consult me about the purpose for the bill. All I'm trying to say is what the impact of the bill will be. And in my opinion, the impact will be that while we will not have this Class 1 misdemeanor as the sole opportunity, the opportunity is going to be able to have these much more broader. And my anticipation is we'll come back in session in January, and the number of people that have been not charged but fined under this is not going to be a small number. It's going to be a very broad number, and that's the impact. I don't know the intent of the governor when he introduced the bill, sir.
Mr. President, speaking briefly to the measure.
Senator has the floor.
I would tell the members of this body that this existing law, before any changes are made by Senator Deed's new bill, allows for a law enforcement officer to issue a summons for a Class 1 misdemeanor that is a crime that was committed in his presence, or to seek from the magistrate a warrant for that Class 1 misdemeanor. That's existing law. What this bill does is allow that same police officer to issue a summons for a civil penalty. In essence, it is lowering the penalty from a Class 1 misdemeanor, 1 to 12 months, to a civil penalty. It allows the police officer to do it without consulting anybody, but here's the point. That police officer can do it now. That police officer right now does not have to go to the magistrate or to the CA. And given the pandemic and given the seriousness of the spread of the virus, I think that the measure has great merit, and I'd ask the body to support it.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senior senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak against this bill.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I have grave concerns over this bill as a person myself who has a medical exemption for not being able to wear a mask and going into countless buildings and businesses in which they say if you don't wear a mask, they're going to refuse you service. Even though Executive Order 63 provides an exception that says persons with health conditions that prohibit wearing a face covering, nothing in this order shall require the use of a face covering by any person for whom doing so would be contrary to his or her health or safety because of a medical condition. Mr. President, the executive order goes further in the exception to say any person who declines to wear a face covering because of a medical condition shall not be required to produce or carry medical documentation verifying the stated condition, nor the person be required to identify the precise underlying condition. Mr. President, my concern is that we are discriminating and using extortion against people who have legitimate medical conditions and cannot wear a mask. Mr. President, I would argue that already under the current Executive Order 63, there is a lot of confusion with business owners who have been given the onus of enforcing the governor's executive orders. Mr. President, these business owners are confused. They have done their due diligence. They have posted the executive orders on their place of businesses along with those exemptions. But then they are creating store policies mandating that the employees, who many of which have medical conditions, are forcing them to wear the mask, but also anyone that comes into their store wearing a mask. I say all this, Mr. President, to tell you that even under the current situation that we're in, that if we add a financial consequence to this executive order, you're going to be denying goods and services to people who are legitimately disabled, people who have reasons that they cannot, have medical conditions, or they cannot wear a mask. People of all different types of reasons cannot wear these masks, Mr. President. And now, if those who vote for this are basically voting in favor of extortion, penalizing financially people who cannot afford these penalties, people who need medication, food, who are going to be turned away legitimately from businesses because they fear a financial penalty of up to $500 or a Class 1 misdemeanor, are law-abiding citizens who legitimately cannot wear a mask. We are penalizing these people, Mr. President, and I have grave concerns over that. Thank you.
Thank the senator. For what purpose the senator from Hanover, Senator McDougall, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, would the gentleman, senator from Bath, rise for a question?
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, as I'm scrolling through the bill, can you point to me where this new language of the $500 civil penalty is limited to the current pandemic as described by the senator from Arlington?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say to the gentleman that there's nothing in this bill that limits it to the current pandemic. What the language says is that the executive order has to declare how the bill will be enforced, how a violation will be punished, and it can be declared a violation of either a Class 1 misdemeanor or up to a civil penalty of up to $500. But there's no limitation on this bill that just applies to this pandemic.
Further question?
Yes, Mr. President. Would the gentleman yield for additional questions?
Senator Yield.
I yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, as I asked the gentleman to look further in that code section, and as I read in 44-146-17, it indicates that the governor, in his judgment, may declare a state of emergency. Can you tell me what limitations there are to the governor declaring a state of emergency, and could there be one for something, say, heart disease?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I'd say that there's nothing in this bill that per se changes the governor's authority with respect to when to declare, when he can or cannot declare a state of emergency. The bill is fairly broad and gives the governor the ability to keep Virginia safe and healthy in an emergency sort of situation. But there's nothing about this bill that addresses that specific issue.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for additional question?
I'll yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
So, Mr. President, would the gentleman agree with me then that if this language is not restrictive and the governor has wide authority, including or limited only by his judgment, would the gentleman not agree something, say, heart disease kills more Virginians than the current pandemic, and as such, the governor could place a civil penalty of up to $500 on the use of salt?
Senator has the floor.
I would say to the gentleman that that is a very interesting scenario. This bill does not necessarily deal with the what-ifs of life. The governor has not declared a state of emergency with respect to heart disease. He's declared a state of emergency with respect to this pandemic, and that's what this bill envisions giving the governor an alternative punishment besides a Class 1 misdemeanor, creating a criminal record for a person who violates this. This bill is about reducing penalties and about giving the governor options. It doesn't have anything to do with when the governor can or cannot call a state of emergency.
Further question?
No, but speak to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator, it's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I appreciate the gentleman answering those questions, and I think he answered them truthfully. This bill does not limit the authority of the governor. And right now, the way the section is being interpreted by many, and there are differences in that interpretation, the governor has extremely wide latitude when they can declare an emergency and issue executive orders under that state of emergency. Mr. President, if you read down through the section later on, specifically the one that is being amended of this bill, it talks about executive orders and the penalties of the Class 1 misdemeanor. The only limitation laid out in that section is including those directing a state of emergency and directing an evacuation. Mr. President, you could read this code section to say the only time a governor can issue an executive order that has a criminal penalty for which you could go to jail, lose your liberty for up to 12 months, is if you violate an order relating to an evacuation. Mr. President, if you read that, then you would say this bill can only add a civil penalty in lieu of that criminal 12-month penalty. But Mr. President, if you read this code section to say that is only an example and that is not a limitation on the governor, then Mr. President, governor is only limited by their gut judgment. So if the governor has good judgment and limits their executive order to criminal and or civil penalties where they have good judgment, then maybe you're okay with that. But Mr. President, I do not think we as a separate branch of government, we as the legislative branch should be giving the only limitation to any governor, regardless of who they are, the ability to put penalties on Virginians only limited by their judgment. Mr. President, this is a civil penalty of $500. You do not get the right to counsel, so there's no right to have a lawyer present to help you defend yourself if you're indigent. You have to go to court. You have to argue your case in front of the judge without any assistance, and the government has the ability to bring their full force and effect of the governor's office or any of the other prosecutorial assistance they wish to have. Mr. President, when we're looking at making laws where people can be held criminally or civilly liable, we need to make sure that they are exact and clear and limited. Mr. President, there's no limitation on this to the pandemic. There's no limitation on this to the things that we are dealing with supposedly in this legislative session. You can do it for anything. If the governor decides in their judgment they want to issue an executive order and they want to attach a civil penalty for it, they can, period. Mr. President, I think that this bill is dangerous for Virginia. It is dangerous to give the government the ability to say, without going through a legislative process, without the Senate debating, the House debating, our constituents being able to contact us, being able to tell us their views of whether that should be the law or not, the ability to put a penalty on Virginians. I just think it's wrong to do. And Mr. President, I would hope that the members of this body would reflect on the obligation that we have been given, the oath that each of us has taken to defend the Constitution of Virginia and the United States, and to make sure that our constituents, our citizens, have the ability to be heard in things where they can be criminally charged or assessed a civil penalty. Mr. President, this is ceding that power. If you vote for this, you're pretty much saying it doesn't matter what we do. we might as well stay home in January and February and March, because the governor has the ability to make every decision at any point in their judgment to criminalize or issue a civil penalty for behavior. And Mr. President, that is a bad decision. That is not one that this body should put forward.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose is Senator from Lynchburg, Senator Peake, rise?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the bill.
Senator, has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I understand the senator from Bass' intent in bringing this bill and to change it from a misdemeanor to a civil penalty. And I suspect that the intent is good, and I suspect that the governor's intent is good, and that we don't want to charge people with crimes. We just want to have civil issues and then maybe just take their money. The problem with this bill is that it doesn't address the underlying issue, in that we have completely ceded our authority as the Virginia State Senate, and the Virginia House of Delegates has completely ceded its authority as the lawmaking bodies of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and given complete and total power to the governor of Virginia. And we had bills brought in this emergency session to address this issue. Right now, the governor declares a state of emergency, which he did 6 months ago. And I think you can all see we're not in a state of emergency right now. And I agree with the senator from Arlington. And I think, and I'm not here to criticize the governor. A lot of his methods have worked. We have been successful. We have not seen a rapid spread of the virus. But we cannot give complete and total power to the governor unchecked. It runs until June of 2021, at which point he can then declare another state of emergency, and the General Assembly of Virginia has absolutely no say-so over that power. And we brought bills to limit this, to say bring us back in 30 days to look at these executive orders. Bring us back in 45 days. Bring us back in 60 days. And none of those bills made it out of committee. Did not even make it out of committee to be discussed and debated on the floor of the Virginia State Senate about us ceding complete and total authority to the governor to rule like a king by executive order. And when you look at this bill, and then my computer turns off. Where an executive order declares a violation shall be punishable as a civil penalty. Where an executive order, anytime he wants, he can declare it an emergency with no oversight from us. That ought to cause each and every single one of y'all some concern, that for a year and a half we can be governed by executive order. And right now, yes, sure, the governor is doing his best. But I tell you what, think about it. Think about it in 2022 when we come in here and it's Governor Amanda Chase who's in charge of the Commonwealth of Virginia and declares a sudden emergency. How are y'all going to feel then when she starts ruling by executive order for 18 months, and then she does it again and rules for another 18 months, or 36 months of her tenure as your governor? She's ruling by executive order, and you don't have any provision whatsoever to review what she's doing, and she can declare it a civil penalty and take $500 from you each and every violation, and for a monthly violation up to $2,000. Think about the power we have given the governor and our complete refusal to address the power we have given him in this special session. We killed those bills in committee. There's absolutely no review from the General Assembly and the people of the Commonwealth to rule or have any say-so about the governor's declaration of executive power. You ought to think long and hard about that. And I move that we vote against, encourage you to vote against this bill.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is Senator from James City County, Senator Norman, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd rise to speak against the bill with a little less passion.
Senator has the floor.
I do agree with the senator from Bedford that I think the legislative branch, speaking on a bipartisan and on a bicameral basis, that we really made a significant mistake in extending this opportunity in the law to the administration for an indefinite period of time without any opportunity for legislative involvement. But that is in Chapter 13 of the history book. Some of you may notice that recently I went to Harry's hair house, where I was set up and had my locks trimmed. And I say I was set up because I didn't wear a mask, and I didn't realize that there was a requirement that if you went to the salon that everybody had to wear a mask regardless. And I know this was a setup on my part. But having said that, I'm a little more concerned, and it perhaps esoteric and lost on most of us here. So unlike the frequent refrain, I will not wrap up by saying, now don't you agree with me? My concern is, having had the privilege of sitting on the Courts Committee or the Courts and Judiciary Committee for many years, I do not recall an opportunity where the Courts Committee in either of the bodies did an either-or situation where, in fact, we as a legislator abdicated the discretion to the administration, advocated the discretion to the executive branch of government to decide whether or not an offense was going to be civil or criminal. We pass laws that say this is a criminal offense and we categorize it, or we pass laws and say this is a civil offense. I don't recall a situation where we abdicated the legislative responsibility and the legislative discretion to the executive branch to determine when something was criminal and when something was civil, and to absolutely incorporate it on an executive order. It just seems totally contradictory to the legislative process we've set up in the separation of powers. Don't you agree?
Thank the senator. For purposes, the senator from King George, Senator Stewart, rise.
Speak to the bill, Mr. President.
Senator's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, there are days, I've been in the Senate for a while now, and there are days you sit in the session and you listen to a bill and you think, gosh, am I looking at the same bill that they're looking at? Mr. President, this is one of those days from some of the comments that I've heard. I do agree with the gentleman from James City County that probably a long time ago there was a mistake made with ceding this authority to the executive branch. But it was this General Assembly that did that. And it was this General Assembly that said if you violate an executive order, it's a Class 1 misdemeanor. Now, I've heard about voting for, what was my favorite comment today? Voting for extortion. Well, I would point out to the members that currently under the law that the General Assembly debated however many years ago and passed, if you violate this order, if you don't wear a mask, if you, whatever the matter may be, you're charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor. And a Class 1 misdemeanor in the state of Virginia is a $2,500 fine and or up to 12 months in jail. It's a pretty serious offense in Virginia. It would be serious if I were charged with it. I would be concerned. And if you are simply charged with that, it is a reflection on your record, even if you're not convicted of it. There are those who would say, well, nobody's going to convict somebody for violating an executive order of a Class 1 misdemeanor. I've been practicing law for 30 years, and I can tell you, there are a whole lot of people out there who would get convicted. I've heard Commonwealth's attorneys won't pursue these, and you don't have to go to the Commonwealth's attorney if it's just a civil offense. Well, I got news for you. If you read the Code of Virginia, Commonwealth's attorneys are not required or obligated to prosecute misdemeanor offenses. And therefore, they don't get funding for prosecuting misdemeanor offenses, and therefore, they don't prosecute many misdemeanor offenses except for DUIs. And anybody who's a lawyer understands that's the way it works. DUIs they prosecute, the rest of them just go right before the judge, and the judge makes the decision. So I look at this a little bit differently. Right now, I have constituents who are very prone to say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to wear a mask there. I'm not going to do what the governor is telling me what to do. And I'm concerned that my constituent's going to be charged with a Class 1 misdemeanor. And they may have a very good reason. As the gentle lady from Chesterfield suggested, they may have a very good reason for not abiding by the order. But they have to go through a criminal case if they don't. And what the governor has suggested here is that's just too stiff. It's too strict to charge people with a criminal offense. I think we should be able to lessen that and make it up to a $500 fine. Could be a $25 fine. And perhaps I don't see this correctly, perhaps I don't read it correctly. It has absolutely nothing to do with the governor's authority. And I too believe the General Assembly needs to jealously guard its legislative powers and not give it away to the executive branch. As I look at this, it seems to me to be a very reasonable, thoughtful measure so that we don't have our constituents and the citizens of Virginia charged with criminal offenses when they should not be. So I'm going to support the bill.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding Senate Bill 5117?
Mr. President.
Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
If I could just close this out, most of the argument about this bill is not about the bill, it's about the underlying policy of giving the governor these emergency powers. I look at the code section, it goes back to 1973. It was most recently amended in 2008, 2007, 2006, 2004, 2000. My point is that if this legislation became part of the law in 1973, the Democrats controlled then, but it's been amended multiple times over the years when the other side of the aisle has had control. So this has been, and honestly, if it's been the law since 1973, I don't remember a prior state of emergency like this. We are in an emergency situation. This simply, as the senator from King William points out, it simply gives the governor an option that can reduce the burden of one charged with violation. I hope that you'll pass this bill.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall Senate Bill 51... Take a brief pause. You good? All right. Question is, shall Senate Bill 5117 pass? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 21, noes 17.
Ayes 21, noes 17. Senate Bill 5117 passes.
Uncontested calendar Senate bills on second reading. Senate Bill 5039, a bill relating to emergency services and disaster law, powers and duties of governor, purchase of personal protective equipment during a disaster caused by a communicable disease, a public health threat. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations with an amendment.
Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Committee on Finance and Appropriations amendment be agreed to.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the committee amendment be agreed to? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee amendment is agreed to. Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the bill be engrossed and passed to its third reading.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the bill be engrossed in advance to its third reading? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is engrossed in advance to its third reading.
Senate Bill 5116, A bill relating to in-home consumer-directed services, electronic visits, verification, exception. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
Senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal.
Mr. President, I move that the bill be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the bill be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading.
Regular calendar, Senate bills on second reading. Senate Bill 5025, a bill relating to Board and Commission of Health, emergency orders and regulations, duration. Reported from the Committee on Education and Health.
Senator from Bedford, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, for everyone that has an interest in that bill, we have continued to look for amendments to the bill. I anticipate that there will be some of those, and I anticipate they'll be next week. So, therefore, I would request that the bill go by for the day again.
Thank the Senator. Without objection, Senate Bill 5025 will go by for the day.
Senate Bill 5050, a bill relating to parole, notice and certification, monthly reports, discretionary early consideration. Reported from the committee, committee amendments have been rejected by the Senate, and there is a floor substitute.
Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servo.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I have a point of order. Rule 41 talks about speaking offensive words in debate, and I was just curious whether the senator from James City County's pants violate that rule.
There's a senator from James City County.
Anyway, I'll withdraw that. Mr. President, I'd move that we waive reading of the floor substitute.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the reading of the floor substitute be waived? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The reading of the floor substitute is waived. Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd move the floor substitute and speaking to that motion.
Senator, the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, this substitute was handed out, I believe, yesterday, maybe the day before. It does four things differently than the committee amendments. If anybody's familiar with the committee amendments that we rejected the other day. So the first thing that's different from the committee amendments are it removes the requirement that the chairman of the parole board certify their compliance with law under oath. That was contained in the bill in about 4 or 5 different places. It takes that out. The second thing that this bill does, which is different from what the committee approved, is on line 24. And this says that and these edits, by the way, were requested by the administration to help clarify some of the things in the code. But on line 24, it says that the Commonwealth Attorney can be notified of a decision to grant parole by either electronic or certified mail. The original bill, the current code says only by certified mail, and this is just notice only to the Commonwealth Attorney. Then the third difference is on lines 28 through 31, it makes clear that the Department of Corrections has to wait 21 business days from the moment the decision to release somebody is granted before they can be released from prison. That's just to be clear. In the code, the DOC has to wait, and DOC cannot release somebody early. And then at the very bottom of page 2, lines 53 through 56, I think this was new also, which is that if a parole is granted, they will publish the list. The senator from Rockingham's bill originally had a list being published every month. This just makes clear that the list, the person's name will only appear on the list if the Commonwealth Attorney and the victim have actually been notified. If they have not been notified, then the parolee's name will not appear on the list. So having made those changes, that's the difference between the committee amendments and this substitute.
Thank you, Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the floor substitute? Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I do thank the senator from Eastern Fairfax for his many courtesies with respect to this. He did provide me with an advance copy of his proposed substitute, and I've had an opportunity to speak with him about it and to look at it. And I want to point out a couple of things about this substitute and urging the members to vote no. You know, this bill was brought to address some of the technical components of some of the dispute that has arisen over the course of the past several months with respect to the parole board. It has attempted to set forth more clearly what their obligations are, to provide more transparency, and to make sure that the obligations that are already embedded in existing code are actually performed. And while I appreciate the efforts of the Senator from Eastern Fairfax, I would point out a couple of things with respect to what this does. First, on line 24, and this is I think, the least offensive of the changes that have been suggested. I mean, this does change existing code. Existing code says that a Commonwealth's attorney is to receive by certified mail notice of the impending release of a prisoner on parole. What this does is it doesn't change my bill. It changes existing code to reduce the kind of notice that is required to a Commonwealth's attorney from certified mail, which we all know. When certified mail comes to our office, we take particular note of it. We take particular care to make sure that it gets to the right place. Our staff understands that. Our clerical personnel understand that as well. And what this does is says that notice going to a Commonwealth's attorney's office can go by electronic mail, and heaven knows who's going to be the recipient of that, who's going to be charged with the receipt of that. We certainly hope that it's going to provide adequate notice, but I'm concerned that it reduces the threshold, reduces the significance of the notice that is being provided pursuant to that section. Going over to the provisions on page 2 of the substitute, I would point out that, you know, I don't have an objection to this portion of the substitute. This provides that the state police, or excuse me, the Department of Corrections has the responsibility for not releasing somebody until 21 days after the notice is provided to the appropriate persons. The problem has been that the parole board has just simply ignored the obligation embedded in code to give the notice, and has fallen back on the suggestion that, oh, it's not our job to determine when somebody's released. And if they just held up long enough, we surely would have figured out that we didn't give notice to the victims or to the Commonwealth's attorney. You know, this does provide some additional assurance that that notice is going to be provided, but it's pushing that obligation off on somebody else, an obligation that the parole board should have been performing, has not been performing, and I suppose to the extent that it ensures that nobody's going to be released until 21 days after notice, that's a positive change from past practices, at least over the course of the past several months. The changes on line 52 through 54, or I guess the changes in, section 7, I do have some concerns about that. Number one, it eliminates the requirement that the parole board provide notice of its reason for granting parole. Right now, the requirements imposed by code require the parole board to list the reasons why it denies parole. And it does that for the significant majority of the people who are up for parole pursuant to this provision. but there is no requirement that the parole board state its reason for granting parole. And I would respectfully submit that that's an important part of this bill because it has significant public safety implications for communities across Virginia. And if the parole board is going to let a murderer out or a rapist out of prison, the least it can do is say why. He's reformed. They served for 40 years, and we think that's enough time. That he has an exemplary prison record. It's not a significant burden, but that's coming out of this bill. So instead, what is going to continue to exist is an obligation by the parole board to say why it denied parole, but when it implicates the safety of our communities across the Commonwealth of Virginia, it can say nothing. And I would submit that that is a mistake to take that out of this bill. Finally, on lines 52 and 53, this deals with the timing of notification. And I suppose that the reason that the Senator from Eastern Fairfax included this was to try and make sure that victims of crimes who might be traumatized by the release of somebody who has perpetrated a crime upon them hears about the impending release from the parole board and not from a newspaper or from a neighbor who happens to look at, for whatever reason, the monthly list of persons who were granted parole. And while I appreciate perhaps that sentiment, I just don't believe that there is anybody who is seriously benefited from delaying the notice. They can provide this notice monthly. They can print that list. And I do not know and have not met a victim who has said, I want to know later rather than sooner, that the person who raped me or the person who murdered my family member is being released from prison. I want to find out after they're released from prison as opposed to before they're released from prison. I know that it may require an extra phone call. It may require extra diligence on the part of the parole board to make sure that it has actually performed its obligations better than it has over the course of the past several months in making sure that victims and Commonwealth's attorneys know that in a timely manner that the person who victimized them or the person they prosecuted is being released. I know that it relieves them or gives them another out if they fail to perform that obligation. And then finally, the other thing that I would respectfully submit is a grievous error in connection with this substitute is it does remove the certification requirement. The parole board has obligations under existing law with respect to notification of victims and law enforcement. However, the administration and the parole board has said there's nothing you can do to us about it if we don't perform those obligations. We just talked about our legislative prerogative. Heck, this is an obligation that is actually imposed by the Code of Virginia. We just gave the governor, presumptively, the power to levy $500 fines or to prosecute people for misdemeanors for violating his order. Yet, we're taking out of this bill an important protection to make sure that the rights of victims across Virginia are protected. And I would respectfully submit that that's moving in the wrong direction, and frankly, in a different direction from the direction that we were headed in the previous bill that we passed. This is actually an obligation imposed by law. And all that certification requirement was intended to provide was some means of providing accountability for persons who are appointed to a board that pays $118,000 or $136,000 a year. And if you don't perform those obligations right now, apparently, at least as things stand now, there's nothing that can be done about it. We've got an opportunity with this bill to correct that and just say, just do your job. Fulfill those obligations. Earn that $136,000 a year. And if you do, you're going to be just fine. Victims are an important class of persons here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They don't have lobbyists. They've just got you and me standing up for them. So I would respectfully submit that while I'm grateful for the courtesies that have been extended, I would respectfully submit that in multiple respects that this substitute is misguided and would ask the members to consider rejecting the substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Serville.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the bill. I'm sorry, the substitute.
Senator's the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I also want to say I should have said it's nice to have the senator from Rockingham back in the chamber after a couple weeks. I've been missing one of my sparring partners here. But having said that, a couple things. First of all, the notice to the Department of Corrections. The Department of Corrections determines the release date and decides when that happens, not the parole board. And so it was important to stick in here clear language directing the Department of Corrections exactly when they're to release to make sure that we don't have that disconnect again. And that's why that language is necessary. Secondly, with regard to recording the reasons why the parole board is choosing to parole an individual, I haven't talked with the administration about that language, but I would suspect that part of the problem with that is that that's trying to figure out, for example, legislative history. I suspect if you were to ask all the 40 of us why we're voting for a specific bill, you wouldn't get the same answer. And you also probably wouldn't get the same answer from each of us about what a bill means, which is one of the reasons we don't really have a lot of legislative history in Virginia, is because people who vote for things collectively often have different motives and reasons, and trying to agree on exactly what the reasons were. Each one of the three members might have a different reason. They might not collectively agree on the one reason, but they agree on the result. And so that's, I think, part of the reason why trying to put that in writing would be difficult. The third thing is with regard to the notice. I believe the purpose of the notice is so that the victims' families don't discover somebody's been paroled from the newspaper instead of from the parole board, which is why the name doesn't go on the list until after the victim's been notified. And so I think that's probably what the intent was there. And lastly, with regard to the oath piece, there's not another single person that I'm aware of who works for the government that we require to certify under oath they're following the laws that we pass. We don't ask judges to do that. We don't ask clerks of court. We don't ask our police officers every time that they sign something or take somebody into arrest that they're following the law. I mean, we don't ask the tens of thousands of people who work in state government that they're following our laws. So it didn't strike anybody as rational that we would take this one single board and require them to certify under oath that they're following the law. So I think it's a good substitute with the amendments we've made. I think this will clear the way for this bill to pass as it's been now cleaned up, and I hope we'd adopt the substitute.
Thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the floor substitute? Senator from Western Fairfax, Senator Marsden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would the gentleman from Eastern Fairfax resume the floor for questions?
Senator Yield.
I'll yield.
Senator Yield, you have the floor.
I think this is largely a good floor amendment. I would agree, I think, to some extent with the gentleman from Rockingham that we all get buried in electronic mail. I know during the special session it's been especially difficult to keep up with it. And there is something special about certified mail that gets the attention. It's really a legal notice rather than a blip on your electronic email system. And I think it does rise to the level of importance that a certified letter. Would the gentleman be inclined to accept a line amendment to just keep it at certified mail.
Senator has the floor.
Well, first of all, Mr. President, I think we'd have to adopt the substitute first and then do a floor amendment to do that procedurally. But, you know, I would have to have a conversation with some people about, you know, I guess we could take the bill by for the day after we do the substitute and figure out if that might work. But or we could take it up on the House side, I guess. But, okay, then no, I do have a problem with that.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is Senator from James City County? Senator Norman rise.
Mr. President, I rise to ask if the gentleman who is advocating this bill would be so generous to yield for a question.
Will Senator yield?
Only if he changes his pants.
Senator, you have the floor.
Well, his response was so quiet, and he knows how timid I am. That's why they call me Senator Cream Puff over here. But having said that, as I look at Senate Bill 5012, am I correct in assuming that you are the chief patron of that bill?
Senator's floor.
I don't do numbers, but okay, I'm not, I'm told.
I'm sorry, 50-50, I apologize.
Sorry, that's Senator from Roanoke County, apparently.
Further question?
Mr. President, my follow-up question is, and the reason that I even stood up to ask is, one of the things I've always admired about this senator is his fierce independence. And his independence is demonstrated whether he is a proponent of a piece of legislation or whether he is an opponent of it. And I am just wondering about the substitute that he has offered when he demurred and said he didn't know whether he could accept an amendment that he had to talk with other people. And my reaction was that just seems an abdication of the independence that he spent a career trying to establish. And he certainly is one of the great intellects in this body when it comes to criminal law. So I'm just perplexed. Why do you need to talk to anyone? You know this bill cold.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I appreciate the Senator from James
That's a
City County.
rhetorical question, Mr. President. Don't you agree?
Senator has the floor.
You know, I would want to get more feedback on why the language was introduced. I thought it made a lot of sense to me because it gets actually quicker notice to the Commonwealth Attorney, which is why I thought it was put in there. But also, you know, certified mail has to be picked up and signed for, and sometimes can be delayed in terms of being picked up by people. So I thought it was a good idea, but nobody's raised any issue with it until this moment, so I haven't thought to ask anybody a question about it.
Mr. President?
Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Would the Senator from Eastern Fairfax yield for a question?
Will Senator yield?
Sure.
Senator yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, if the intention is simply to not to water down, but to provide quicker notice, wouldn't it make sense to say by electronic and certified mail? And
Senator's floor.
I would agree. That's the purpose. That would make more sense.
Okay, one at a time. Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
And would the senator be amenable to that?
Senator has the floor.
Sure.
Mr. President, point of parliamentary inquiry.
Junior Senator from Richmond City, Senator Morrissey.
Mr. President, before we discuss amendments to Senator Servill's substitute, shouldn't we have a vote on it first?
That's correct. For what purpose is the Senator from Arlington, Senator Favola, rise?
Mr. President, speaking to the substitute.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill was heard in Rehab and Social Services. I'm proud to say we had a lively discussion. We actually heard from some family members of folks who had been paroled. And I will just say that the guts of the bill, Senator Obenshain's bill, or the senator from Rockingham, is still very much intact in this substitute. So I think we're talking about some process points that Secretary Moran had brought to our attention, but the transparency guts of the bill are still there, in particular on line 50, where we say the offenses for which the prisoner was convicted, the jurisdiction in which the offense was committed, the amount of time the prisoner served, all of that will now be new information and available in the Department of Corrections record-keeping system. So I think that's really the meat here, and we should consider this substitute to be sort of a cleanup issue. And by the way, I think the senator from Eastern Fairfax should be complimented for being collaborative. Each one of us may have expertise in a certain line of work, but nobody has all the answers to every complicated issue that seems to appear in every piece of legislation we consider. So I have to say, being collaborative is a good thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator D. Steph, rise?
Mr. President, would the gentlelady from Arlington yield for a quick question?
Will Senator yield?
Yes, Mr. President, I yield.
Senator yields. You have the floor.
And Mr. President, I agree with the gentlelady from Arlington that providing the additional information on here is very beneficial, so we know all about the prisoners and have additional data on what's happening to those prisoners when they're being paroled. However, my question to the gentlelady is, what good is it to have all this information if you're not going to provide the name of the parolee until the month after they've been released? So if she can answer that question, Mr. President, I'd be happy to listen. Thank you.
Senator's the floor.
Mr. President, I would say that we have to consider issues of privacy and compassion. I think it's very important that family members and the Commonwealth Attorney be notified before something like that goes public. And many stakeholders on all sides of the aisle would agree that notification first is important.
Further question?
Mr. President, if I may, just as a quick follow-up.
Senator
I'm glad
Yield.
she agrees with me, the gentlelady from Arlington, that prior notification is very, very important. But what this substitute does is it says that we're going to release the prisoner, and then we're going to inform the Commonwealth Attorney, and then we're going to inform the victims. And I understand that at times we tend to want to help the criminals and look out for the best interest of the criminals. And I've been going through this entire special session with different criminals we're releasing, and they're coming back with additional crimes and hurting and killing and maiming and raping additional people. But, Mr. President, I don't think that providing it after they've been paroled a month later, that there's any benefit to the victims of these horrible, heinous crimes. And Mr. President, my additional question is, this information, and specifically the victim's name, won't even be released until after the criminal's released. So the victims, the Commonwealth attorneys, and everybody else won't even know who the heck's been released until after they're already back amongst our families, our friends, and our children.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, that is not my understanding of what the substitute says. So I think maybe there's a misunderstanding. The Commonwealth Attorney and the victims' families would be notified before the offender, if you will, is paroled, and then the offender's name would be released. And I think there was that 21-day language in here. If I am incorrect, I will defer to the patron of the substitute, the senator from Eastern Fairfax, if you want to further elaborate. Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servell. You say you're not allowed to speak? Okay, that's great. That's great. Thought that was important to clarify. And that goes for the rest of the session, I believe. So, do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the floor substitute? Seeing none, the question is, shall the Senate adopt the floor substitute? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The noes have it. The floor substitute is rejected. Seeing at least 8 hands, we will take a recorded vote. All those in favor of adopting the floor substitute will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 20, noes 18.
Ayes 20, noes 18. The Senate adopts the floor substitute.
Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
while a floor amendment is being printed, can this go by temporarily?
Without objection, Senate Bill 5050 will go by temporarily.
Senate Bill 5012, a bill relating to the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Virginia Parole Board member votes. Reported from the Committee on Finance and Appropriations.
Senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderline.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Senate Bill 5012 be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall Senate Bill 5012 be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading.
Uncontested calendar, Senate bill on first reading.
Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate bills on first reading on the uncontested and regular calendar, pages 6 through 10, that's Senate Bill 5043 through 5053, that the rules be suspended, the first constitutional reading of the titles be dispensed with.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the rules be suspended and the first reading of the titles of Senate bills on the uncontested and regular calendars, pages 6 through 10, Senate Bill 5043 through Senate Bill 5053, be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 37, noes 0.
Ayes 37, noes 0. The reading of the titles is dispensed with. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I now move those said bills go by for the day.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the Senate bills on the uncontested and regular calendars now on second reading go by for the day? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bills will go by for the day.
Memorial Resolution. Senate Resolution 532, celebrating the life of the Honorable John Henry Hager.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, I'd ask that that go by for the day, please, sir.
Without objection, Senate Resolution 532 will go by for the day.
Commending Resolution. Senate Resolution 533, commending Anna Leader.
Senator from Alexandria, Senator Evan.
I move the resolution pass.
Senator want to speak to it?
No.
Okay. Thank the Senator. Question is, shall Senate Resolution 533 be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Resolution 533 is adopted. Senate will temporarily be at ease.
There you go. While you're here. Give me his, I'll give it to him.
Senate will come to order. Senators will please take their seats. Returning to page 5, Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, on Senate Bill 5050, I move to waive the reading of the floor amendment just distributed.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the reading of the floor amendment be waived? All in favor of the motion will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The reading of the floor amendment is waived. Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, I move to pass the floor amendment, and speaking to that,
Senators, the floor.
I appreciate the brave show of independence by my friend from Eastern Fairfax, and I certainly hope that he doesn't regret that, but this floor amendment simply substitutes or and for or to make it clear that notification to Commonwealth's attorneys go by electronic and certified mail. Certified mail is under existing law, and this simply adds electronic mail. So with that, I move that it pass.
Thank the Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard regarding the floor amendment? Seeing none, the question is, shall the floor amendment be adopted? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The floor amendment is adopted.
Mr. President,
Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, I move that the bill be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the bill be engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bill is engrossed and advanced to its third constitutional reading. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Mr. President, I inquire of the clerk, does that complete the calendar for today?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
That being the case, I would move that we stand in recess until Tuesday, 10 a.m. Tuesday, September 8th. At that time, the session will be resumed by a pro forma group, and they will adjourn, and we will meet on what the plan is next Wednesday and next Thursday, but not Friday.
So try it to you, Mike.
We will stand in recess until 10 a.m. on Tuesday. A pro forma session will be continued at that point. They will adjourn till Wednesday. When we come back here, we will be here just Wednesday and Thursday of next week, and probably the week after, because this place was previously rented, whatever you want to call it, to other parties for the next 2 Fridays.
Mr. President,
Senator from Henrico, Senator Donovan.
would the senior senator from Fairfax yield for a question?
Will Senator yield?
What time Wednesday, Mr. President, and what time Thursday?
Senator, has the floor.
I would assume, I think people would express noon on Wednesday, and then probably we'll be back here at 10 a.m. on Thursday. We will be back. We'll be here at noon on Wednesday and 10 a.m. on Thursday. Okay.
Senator, could we do noon on both days?
What'd you say? Can we do what?
Can we go to Tahiti? Could we do noon both days?
Can we come into session on noon both days? At 12 noon on both days, both Wednesday and Thursday?
I don't have a problem with noon both days. Okay? In fact, somebody had requested that because of the virtual school that their little kid has. So that'd be noon on Wednesday, we'll be here, and noon on Thursday.
And for your information, for the Senate's information, the House adjourned today until Tuesday.
All right. Okay. The senator from Roanoke County, Senator Suderline.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a point of personal privilege briefly, which, if now is the appropriate time, sir.
It is. Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. There's also a motion at the end of it. I want to make this brief because it's Friday, and I understand, but there were some significant anniversaries this week that I just wanted to point out. The other day, the senator from Chesapeake did a great job talking about the 75th anniversary this week of World War II. But there's two other very significant anniversaries in the Commonwealth this week that I did not want to let pass. One, as students across the Commonwealth go back to school this year in different ways, it was actually 50 years ago this week that Governor Linwood Holton walked his daughter to JFK High School here in the city of Richmond, which was previously a predominantly black high school. And when he did that, former Governor Darden referred to it as the most significant happening in the Commonwealth in his lifetime. And just as we discuss all these other issues, I think it's interesting because Governor Holton is still with us. So many of you know him pretty well because we also know his family members. I also, tomorrow will be the 100th anniversary of the birth of our former Lieutenant Governor, Henry Howe, which so many of you are so familiar with. And history making in so many ways, did not have the most productive years in the Senate. When I inquired a few years ago how many bills he got through, it was 2. Which is not great, but that was in part because of the situation he was in with the Byrd organization and the remnants of it. And he showed that there were lots of other ways to advance some of those causes, and he ended up being the first lieutenant governor elected as an independent. And in light of tomorrow being what would have been his 100th birthday, I ask that when we leave today, in whatever form we do, that we do so in honor and memory of our former President of the Senate, Henry Howe.
Thank the Senator. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Seeing none, the clerk will report any announcements on the desk.
I do not have any, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The question is, shall the Senate stand in a recess until Tuesday, September the 8th, until 10 a.m., and that when we do so in the honor and memory of former Lieutenant Governor Henry Howe. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands in recess until Tuesday, September the 8th at 10 a.m., and we do so in the honor and memory of former Lieutenant Governor Henry Howe.
And there are 163 days till Valentine's Day.
Most importantly, let me do it again.